Okay, folks, that was louder than I expected. Hello and good evening, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for the Racing Community session today, which is entitled Unearthing Invisible Seafaring Histories of Empire, Britishness and Belonging. As you will have gathered, I am not Clive Lewis. I am Shabna Begum. I am Director of Research at the Runnymede Trust, and unfortunately Clive can't be with us today. He's had some kind of injury. It's a mysterious injury, but it's one that has made him unavailable for tonight's event. So he does send his apologies, and it means that I've heard so much about Clive's charm and wit at these events, and unfortunately I don't get to see it, and in fact you indeed get the functional me instead. So I will be chairing the event for tonight. I was going to be one of the speakers, and I'll explain why I was going to be one of the speakers on the panel rather than the chair, because I do have a bit of skin in the game as well. I will introduce you first of all to our panellists. We've got Asif Shakoor is an independent scholar. He has done lots of research on his own family history, and he's the author of a forthcoming book, Unearthing Invisible Seafaring Histories of Empire. He's published several articles. He's an associate fellow of the Royal Historical Society, University College London. He is advisory board member of the Mariners' Religion, Race and Empire in British Ports, which is a project based at the University of Bristol, and he's founder of the South Asian Contribution to Great Britain project. So welcome, Asif. We also have Dr. Georgie Wemyss, who is co-director of the Centre for Research on Migration, Refugees and Belonging at the University of East London. She's been researching the invisibility of South Asian seafarer histories in narratives of Britain and leading walks around the Thames, the River Thames. She's the author of The Invisible Empire, White Discourse, Tolerance and Belonging, and co-author of Bordering. As I said, my name is Shabna Begum. I am Director of Research at the Runnymede Trust, but I also have written a book recently which is about the Bengali community in East London, and some of that dates back to some of the work and the conversation that Georgie and Asif will take us through. I guess in setting the context for tonight, a lot of you will have heard about the Indian sailors who were employed on merchant ships from the 17th century from the East India Company. So we're not even just talking about empire and colonialism, we're talking about pre-empire and colonialism. We're talking about the racialised and class-defined seamen who were defined as lashkars. And the term lashkar originally denoted South Asian sailors, but became a description for all non-European sailors. And not only were these sailors subjected to harsh employment and housing conditions, but the lives and voices of those seafarers has also been invisible for centuries. So the records, the histories, the history and the contribution is something that's missing from accounts of our British history. We can look back in archival records, parliamentary debates dating back to 1932, where we have MPs and lords talking about foreigners working on British ships and how they were taking the jobs and the employment from white sailors, and what was Parliament going to do to restore the rights of white workers. Those kind of conversations, sadly, aren't just archival, they are obviously very, very linked to where we're at today, which is why the conversation between Georgie and Asif is so relevant. So Georgie has been exploring how these current narratives relate to our colonial histories, and how lots of the contemporary debates around migration, around our shipping history in particular, how the bordering arrangements there and those conversations relate to a lot of the colonial history that she has been studying and writing about. So she's written a paper called Bordering Seafarers at Sea and on Shore. She draws on historical context and practices borders and belonging through immigration laws and maritime legislation, and looks at the relationship between the public and private partnerships to look at how colonial legacies from 150 years ago still are impactful and tell us about the power relations and the kind of conditions that workers from the global south experience today. We capture some of that story through Asif's own family history and the work that he's been doing. And in terms of the Runnymede Trust, for us at the Runnymede Trust, we clearly are interested in race equality. We're interested in the kind of the current and contemporary conditions of workers, but we're also very interested in how the accounts of our migration history can either ignore and invisibilize and erase some of the really, really important issues that tell us about where we're at today. So I'm going to hand over to Georgie and Asif, who are going to tell us a little bit about how their work has interacted.
Thank you so much, Shamla. Is this working? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. The form is going to be an interview. I'm going to be interviewing Asif. But before doing that, I just want to say a little bit about how we came to be here today. And there's very significant people who are here in the audience. Shamla mentioned for many years I've been leading walks around the East India docks, which are aimed at trying to uncover some of the kind of these seafaring histories which have become very invisible. Shamla's been on one of those walks many years ago with her children, but several years ago I was on the walk, and then right at the end of the walk somebody came up to me and said, "Oh, you have to meet Asif." And that person is here today. She's Professor Victoria Haskins from the University of Newcastle in Australia, who just happens to be here today. And she had, while we were walking around the docks, she had been hearing from Asif about his remarkable family history, and which I haven't been able to listen to at all as we were going around. So I just want to say thank you very much, Vicky, for introducing us. No worries. And it's great that you're able to be here, so thank you. And it's really good to be able to present this work in the Race and Community APPG, because it is so central to these broader issues. Asif, I'm starting off with a picture of the Mongla Dam, I think, when it was being built, which is also quite central to this story. I'm going to just move on to pictures of two significant people here. Which is where the story begins. So you were on a family visit to Pakistan several years ago, and you came across a box. So would you like to tell us a little bit about the box?
That's right, Georgie. I came across a box in Pakistan. My family was having our family home refurbished in Pakistan, and all my grandmother's belongings were actually thrown into my great uncle's garden. And my mother was asking me to search for a box. My mother asked for me to look for a box that my grandmother had, and she would never let anyone touch this box. There was an occasion once when she tried to have a look at the box, and my grandmother freaked out my mother. I don't know if it's because she was a potential daughter-in-law and she didn't have trust in something. But my mother was saying to search this box, and I searched for the box. And from this box, I found a set of papers that were pension letters, Ministry of Social Security, Overseas Group in Newcastle, and they were dated for 1967, April and June. Should I go back to it? Yeah.
Do you want to introduce the grandparents?
Yeah. So on the screen here, you see on the left is a picture of my grandmother, Miss Muhammad B. She was born in 1908. She died in 1989. I never actually met her in person. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got my grandfather, Muhammad Gama. His name was obviously anglicised Muhammad Gama on records. But he was born in 1895 and he died in 1965 on the 16th of August. And both of them were born in ordinary board, which was actually on the border of the Punjab and Kashmir, whereas present Meerput is now actually more inside Kashmir.
So you discovered the box, and inside the box there were various letters which were telling the story of your grandmother trying to claim the pension that she was due from your grandfather.
That's right, Georgie. There was various letters that I came across which seemed very strange, because the letters mentioned something like, I'll just read one of them. My husband served during the war, 1914-1918 in Merchant Navy. I could produce the war medals if and when required. Then another letter from the Ministry of Social Security Overseas Group in Newcastle upon Tyne, dated 11th April 1967, mentioned, it is noted that 1918 war medals supplied by you in sport claim bear on the ring the inscription Muhammad Ghana. So it's these letters that came across. It was quite strange because I didn't know what these letters were about. And at the time when I first began, let's be honest, I didn't actually know what the merchant navy was, the Mercantile Marine. It came across new to me. And then there was another letter also on the 8th of June 1967, which mentioned income tax certificate, statement of holiday pay, and 2 war medals are returned herewith. But when I searched the box, I didn't unfortunately find the medals in the box. There were no medals in the box.
So you found the box, you found these pension letters, and you learned that your grandmother had actually won the pension for herself, and that she possibly had to send the medals for proof of identification of your grandfather. There's something else that you found in the box.
That's right, Georgie. I found this strange document inside the box. It was actually folded in so many quarters and it was really, really tiny. So I unfolded it and not actually knowing the importance of this document. When I unfolded it, it was actually parts of it disintegrated. This was actually a certificate of service for someone by the name of Rahman Hassan. But it's actually, his name was actually not Rahman Hassan, because when I was doing research into this, I found out there's actually a name called Rahima Hassan. There's no name as Rahman in South Asia. So it's actually Rahima, but it's anglicized to Rahman Hassan. And it's actually a certificate of service for the Mercantile Marine, the Merchant Navy, and it's a discharge certificate. It's also known as the continuous discharge certificate, and it's actually for the period of the First World War. And it was actually dated 14th March 1914, a few months prior to the war commencing. And I looked at the various vessels that I saw on the reverse of this certificate. And some of these vessels were the SS Kaiser-i-Hind, which was actually a vessel transporting troops back from the war to Australia. And then there was other vessels such as SS Delta, which is getting involved in troop transport as hospital ship as well. There was SS Syria, which was a hospital ship during the war. And you could see the various datings on the certificate, which state that he even travelled to London at one point.
But this wasn't your grandfather. So you had this mystery continuous discharge certificate, but you had nothing to show the ships that your grandfather had been on. So by now you found out that he had been in the Merchant Marine in the First World War, and I don't know if people know here, but at the beginning of the First World War, about 17.5% of the British merchant navy was made up of South Asian seafarers. By the end of the First World War, that was 20%. So it was increasing the whole time. By the Second World War, it was over a quarter of the Mercantile Marine. So they were one of many men who had been recruited. So you then had to come back to Britain. You brought the box with you, and started doing some research about these medals, and were able to identify medals that your grandfather had been awarded, but which were not in the box.
That's right, Georgie. I brought the documents back to the UK, and I was quite naive, and for some reason, laminated them and brought them back, not knowing it's not a good idea to laminate them. The box, unfortunately, I didn't keep. I actually threw the box away. I don't know why, but I didn't keep the box. But I began researching what medals he would have had. Was he a soldier? Was he a seafarer? What was his role in the war? And I found from research that he received the Mercantile Marine War Medal and the General Service Medal, which is also known as the British War Medal. Something like 2,000 of these medals were issued to South Asian seafarers who served in the First World War. These were actually manufactured in the UK, in Woolwich, in Arsenal, and these were sent by ship to India. And something like 2,000 medals were issued. And I also discovered from records of the British Library, actually, some of these medals were made from steel for Indian seafarers, and a British seafarer made out of silver. So I don't know if it represents some sort of hierarchy to me.
So we're just going to leave the medals there, because you were then searching for the medals. We're going to come back to the medals at the end. But in the meantime, whilst you were trying to search and to locate these missing medals that had been given to your grandfather, you started trying to find out more about his life and about the sorts of work that he was doing on ships and the kind of contracts that he was employed on. And you've found many, many documents just by looking at eBay and elsewhere. So yes, do you want to say something about this one, which is a contract?
Sorry first for that label that's on that document. I forgot to remove it actually when I sent it to Georgie. What you see on screen is what I actually call a Lashkar agreement, but it's titled Lascar agreement. So I came to find out that my grandfather would have signed on a different article of agreement, and what he would have signed is a Lascar agreement, and the British crew would have signed on a crew list of agreement, which is separate for the British crew. And what you find there is that the Lashkar agreement is for the city of Newcastle. I think it's dated for 1951.
And I guess that there will be people here who know and people here who don't know about the different conditions that Indian seafarers were employed under. So it varied a lot over the whole course of the 19th century and then the 20th century. But there were very, very key things like the money that seafarers were paid, their clothing allowance, their food allowance, the amount of accommodation that they had on ships for people who were recruited from South Asian ports in this category of what was known as Lashkar. So he was recruited under one of those, you're assuming, under one of those contracts. And another key point of that was that the names of the men who were in the crew list were not necessarily recorded if they were South Asian.
That's right, Georgie. I came across various records at the National Archives in Kew for various vessels that served India. And one of these was this document here, which mentions on here, the captain's actually put on here, remainder of crew on Asiatic articles. So you find the list of British crew that have been put on this list, but the names of South Asian seafarers would not have been entered obviously on a crew list, a British crew list. You also find that the only instance you find where you probably find South Asian crew members on a British crew list is if it was a death at sea or an accident at sea or someone died at sea, something like that, you'll find the name appear. And one of these I came across was, I'll just quickly mention this to if it's alright. One of these names that came across was Abdullah Ali, who actually died of syphilis on arrival to New York. So Captain Harold Potter actually entered his name on the crew list for the Kiva.
And again, these are things that aren't in museums, they're documents that you've just found on eBay and other internet sources.
That's right, Georgie. I found a large number of these documents from eBay or through various paper dealers, all sorts of places I've managed to get these from, and some I've got from National Archives in Kew, some from the British Library as well.
So you found out that your grandfather was recruited on this, and that he would have travelled down to the Alexandra docks in Bombay and started working on the P&O steamships.
That's right, Georgie. This is actually a picture of the Alexandra dock in Bombay. The Alexandra dock in Bombay has now been renamed to the Indra dock, and I think that was in 1971. It was renamed to the Indra dock, so it's now not known as Alexandra dock. But this picture here is actually for the period of 1917 and not 1915. I think that's just a typo there. Sorry about that. But this picture is for the period of 1917, and that was the same year that my grandfather boarded the SS Kiva at the Alexandra dock.
So we're going to hear more about the SS Kiva soon, but it was like many of the ships that were coming from that dock. It was owned by the P&O company, who employed increasingly large numbers of South Asian seafarers. What did you want to say about this?
Oh, that's right. I came across through this like the Railways magazine, published in December 1929, and it was a unique supplement that was included in the magazine. It shows various ships that were due to leave various ports and arriving in London, some arriving in Australia, some to Karachi, some from Karachi, arriving in London. So it shows various vessels that left Calcutta, Bombay and Karachi.
And again, the significance of these ships connecting different parts of the empire, proved largely by men who were born, like your grandfather at Bombay. But you still wanted to find out more about the life that your grandfather was living on these ships. And this is actually a picture of the Kiva that you know that he made several voyages on.
That's right, this is a picture of the SS Kiva, which is a vessel of the P&O, and it was launched in 1914. The picture you see here is actually of the Kiva arriving in Australia, and the dealer I purchased the image from is actually based in Australia. She's told me that you're the only, or the first person to purchase this image from the United Kingdom. We never had anyone purchase this picture from the United Kingdom. So that's just the Kiva, the vessel that he served on during the First World War.
Do you have any idea if you travelled to Australia at all?
That's right, Georgie. I do know from the crew list that he's travelled to various places, and I know from when he was serving on SS Medina, which is a vessel of the P&O, and that actually, before he served that vessel, that's the same vessel that took King George for his Durbar, for his coronation in India. And on that voyage he travelled to Sydney in Australia. On the Kiva, he unfortunately didn't travel to Australia, but he did travel to the United Kingdom, and he travelled to the United States, New York.
Okay, so how do you know that?
It's a good question, Georgie. Yeah, sorry, I jumped a bit. How I know that is because I was searching crew lists at the National Archives. I was searching crew lists at the British Library. At the Decayed Library, National Maritime Museum. And again, I couldn't find him on crew lists, and I suppose the crew lists survive the National Archives only survive every 5 years. So in between they're destroyed, so they don't survive the entirety. But I came across some crew lists in the United States, Ellis Island, and I'm actually lucky that these crews survived, because Ellis Island had a policy that everyone who docked or arrived at the port of New York had to submit a list of not just the British crew that were on the ship, but of the entire crew, including South Asian crew as well. So because he was actually on the Kiva, and with this policy, he had to actually have his name submitted on his crew list. And then you find his name occurs on line 12 as Mohammed Gama, anglicized as Mahomed, and Gama. And he actually would have wrote his name different. It wouldn't have been pronounced as Mohammed, or pronounced as Muhammad or Mohammed, but not Mohammed, so it was actually anglicized here. And the same anglicized spelling that occurs in this crew list appears also on the Ministry of Social Security letters as anglicized as well.
And people might not be able to see, but can you see the ages, his age and height, I think, is it?
Yeah. I can actually see his age and his height. His age 23, he was 5'8", and I actually looked at his documents, and I actually asked my father how tall was he, because I never actually met my grandfather in my lifetime. And my father told me that he was a big bloke. He ate 4 eggs a day, and he walked almost an hour. When he went to Apples and Pollock, he used to walk an hour there, an hour back, and he would earn something like £3-4 a week as a labourer, stacking tubes that came off the production line in an open yard. He weighed something like 4 squares, and my father told me he was a tall bloke. So I matched these things on the crew list, because if he is 5'8", I know my father was something like 5'6", so I know that these clues told me that this has got to be my grandfather.
And the other significant thing about this is the date. So it's the 21st of January 1918, and it was arriving at New York, having left from the ports of London. And this is really key for how you managed to find out a little bit more about his life. You find him on another crew list here, which is May 1918. Yeah, again New York, coming from London, and again he's there on line 8, same age as then. But so it's amazing, number one, that you managed to find him on any crew lists at all. And number two, you actually managed to track down evidence of his ship being in Victoria Dock. So this is an image of Victoria Dock as it was around that time. It still exists. The GLA, headquarters of the GLA, is now at one end of the Victoria Docks. But this is a really significant document that you found, the official logbook of the SS Kiva.
Oh, that's right. This is the official logbook of the SS Kiva. So like I mentioned earlier, you wouldn't find names of South Asian seafarers on this logbook, apart from Abdullah Ali, which I mentioned earlier, and Mir Faizu, who died actually at sea. So this is the official logbook, and the captain, the commander of the Kiva does something unique, which was very unusual. The peculiar thing he done here was he put down, London, Victoria, DKS. So he abbreviated DOCS for DKS short. And it was very unusual because usually you'd find port of, say, Southampton, or you would say London or Liverpool, but you wouldn't actually say the docks, they docked at. So that actually gave me a good idea where he arrived at. And I always wondered, where did he arrive at? How long did he stay? What did he do? Did he speak English? How did he converse with people when he stayed here? So one of the clues I found was that he wrote at Victoria Docks, and I know that this was handed over to other docks on 8th of December 1917, and they were carrying Bombay mails, passengers and cargo.
So you have the logbook, you know that he was on this ship, and then amazingly through somebody else telling you about this book, you found out that he's not mentioned by name in his memoirs, but the conditions on the ship and some of the life of the ship is mentioned, of this very ship, on these very voyages, is mentioned in his memoirs.
That's right. I came across Change to Lose Life and Struggles of a Revolution, memoirs of Dada Ahmed Haider Khan. And actually, Dada was actually not a name. Dada just means a grandfather. Ahmed Haider Khan was his actual name. And Ahmed Haider Khan was on the same vessel as my grandfather. He was on the Kiva. And you can see his name on this list of deserters in New York as Ahmed Haider Adar Mohammed. So his name, the surname is anglicized. And I think what's happened here is that Ahmed Haider was his actual name, but Adar Mohammed might have been his father's name. So he would be named after his father, such as Ahmed Haider, son of Adar Mohammed. And my grandfather's name was also Mohammed, and just Muhammad on his own, it was not Gama. Gama was actually my great-grandfather's name. And so you put his name as, you write him as Muhammad, the son of Gama, or you say that they do in Arabic, Muhammad ibn Gama, Muhammad, son of Gama. And Gama was actually, I found out, was actually abbreviated. It was actually nameless for, you'd find Gama, it stands for Ghulam Muhammad. So Ghulam Muhammad would be sort of abbreviated as, you take the first letter, the guy in Arabic or the Urdu language, you take the meme from Muhammad for the M, and you just bring those two together, and you abbreviate as Gama for short.
So do you want to say something about the desertion from the ship?
I found out that Ahmed Haider Khan deserted from the ship when he arrived in New York, and he was actually a bonding runner, someone who was a waterman on a ship. So you can see on this, it says bonding runner. And again, you find Wahab-Din Dikta, another person who deserted, and he was a fireman. Because often on cruise you find that they might refer to as one as fireman, or sometimes English fireman.
And the reason why he's deserted, the clue, is in the title of his book, Chains to Lose Life and Struggles of a Revolutionary. So he was an anti-colonial revolutionary who escaped the ship effectively and built a part of a life in the US and getting re-recruited onto American ships, which had better conditions, and then eventually returned to India, and then finally he lived in Pakistan. This is an excerpt from his book, Chains to Lose, where he's talking specifically about the Kiva when it docked in December 1917. He talks about why they were there, and the people that he encountered. Have we got time to read some of it out, do you think? Yeah?
That's right. Ahmed Hatter Khan, he actually wrote this memoir, which I've got actually here, physical copies here, hard copy. He actually wrote this memoir in the Urdu language when he was in prison. This was translated to English by Professor Hassan Gardesi, and it was published first in 1989, and it was subsequently published again in the year 2007 by the University of Karachi, Pakistan. And it's a very rare book I got hold of after Professor Naina Manshikar brought it to my attention. And as she mentioned, there's a copy of the British Library, but I obviously wanted my own copy. So I know the British Library is awkward trying to get a copy, you have to return it in a certain period of time. And I actually wanted to have a copy, so I managed to get hold of a copy from India. So it's very rare to get hold of that. That's right, and going back to what he writes, and I always wondered what did my grandfather do when he stayed here at the Royal Victoria Dock. I mean, he could, from what I understand the oral history, he couldn't speak much English. So I always wondered, what did he do? Where did he stay? What did he do? And from here, I gather from Ahmed Hatter Khan's accounts, like he mentions here, that during the war, during the night, the streets of London were kept dark, and there was nothing visible except the crossbeam of powerful searchlights, which continuously scanned the sky over the city. Thus, London, the cornerstone of the British Empire, was a great gloomy place to live during the winter of 1917 to 1918. Then he mentions about when they left London after Kiev, because the Kiev stayed at the Royal Victoria Dock for a month while it was refitted. So I presume it must have been refitted at the graving dock where they were probably camouflaged and had various equipment fitted in. And then he goes on to say about when they left London, he says, after taking some additional men from the reserve which the P&O kept near the docks and having our photographs taken for identification cards, the SS Kiva crawled out her mooring place in the first week of January 1918. As we passed out the estuary of the Thames, the Straits of Dover and the English Channel, I observed the masts and funnels of vessels that had been sunk by submarines rising out of the water. So it's really, it kind of gives me an image of what, when probably my grandmother has also seen, but what it would have been like, you know, if you're sailing from the Kiva out the Victoria Dock, and seeing funnels and masts, you know, as you approached Dover during the First World War, and how probably frightening it was looking for the South Asian seafarers to see something like that.
I don't know, I've just got a message saying that this isn't working.
Is that better?
Yes. Yeah, so the work that he was doing was in the engine room. And you had the chance to go into an engine room and see what it was like. How did you imagine what it was like for him?
That's right, Georgie. I actually was part of an exhibition for South Asian seafarers on board the HMS Wellington. It was last year for the summer, from April to October, and I had the opportunity to board a vessel, which was a tug. I think it was a Portwee tug, somewhere in Canary Wharf. And I had a chance, and I asked some of the crew that worked in the ship, can I have the opportunity to throw some of the coal in the furnace? And I was given that chance, and I actually stood there, and I actually got a shovel and I threw coal in the furnace, and it was really hot. I was sweating within a few. After throwing the coal in a few times, I was really sweating, and I was really hot. I couldn't actually stand there. I would actually run upstairs to the deck. So I imagine how hard it must have been for my grandfather. And I read something about this in a book called The Blight of Insubordination, and this was published in I can't remember which, some 19. And the author actually mentioned there that the men of the Punjab could stand temperatures of 90 degrees centigrade. So when they crossed the Suez Canal, and they could stand such huge hot temperatures, so they sort of better suit working the engine room. So I presume that's why my grandfather probably would have better suit properly, I guess, working the engine room. And from what I gather from he served as an Argwala, which was referred to as a fireman in the engine room.
But they did many different tasks, and there's just a few images here of the different work that the South Asian seafarers did. So I think this one is doing a boat drill, and that's a picture from the Firth of the Forth, but it's about the same time, I think, isn't it, 1922?
That's right, Georgie.
And then there's several more images that were in the illustrated London News and elsewhere that depicted life on the docks.
Oh, that's right, George. I came across this, was published on the left on the screen. There's a sketch, published inside the Illustrated London News in 1904, and it shows a Hobson Johnson, a curious Hindu celebration at Easter in the East End. And it mentioned that this was at the Royal Albert Dock in east of London. And it's actually not a Hindu celebration. If you look very closely, examine the sketch, you'll actually notice that there's people wearing fez caps, and there's actually Georgie Wemyss which pointed out the caps to me. And you'll find people wearing turbans, caps, and you'll find in the subcontinent in particular, you'll find that when they celebrate the martyrdom anniversary of Imam Hassan and Hussein is marked, you'll find that they actually carry, they make cardboard, like a temple or something to carry that, and so.
So we're going to speed up a bit because I know that we're running a bit out of time. But yeah, so there were depictions of the celebrations or commemorations around the dock, and also many depictions that you found of the awareness that people would have had about the work that South Asian seafarers were doing, and the debates about whether they should be doing it or whether there should be white seafarers employed to doing it. I'm just going to shoot through some of these because they're illustrating the point that seafarers were there, but a key point that is really central to all of this is that on these Lashkar contracts, South Asian seafarers were not allowed to settle in Britain. And at different stages, there were different pieces of legislation which meant that they would have to be returned to the Indian subcontinent and paid off there. And people, there were kind of, P&O at different times would be expected to return people. At other times, an Indian seafarer could be, or almost an Indian working class man in the street could be arrested and questioned on suspicion of being a deserting South Asian seafarer, because there were these laws which meant that they couldn't settle. And that's really important to remember. So painting these, and then of course the other side of this is the torpedoing, the ships going down with so many men working in the engine rooms under the water, which I'm just going to shoot through that to the hospital, because this is also something that you wanted to talk about, having discovered this in the Royal Victoria Docks area.
That's right. These are the images of the foundation stones for the Seamen's Hospital at the Royal Victoria Dock. One of those were 1899 and the other ones were 1937. And this again is an image of seafarers being treated at the Royal Albert Docks, the Seamen's Hospital. And this was published in 1911 in the Illustrated London News. And if you look very closely, looking at the image very closely, you look very closely at the skin complex, if you work out some of these South Asian seafarers in the hospital.
And this is important because of thinking about the injuries that men sustained and the illnesses, but also that many men died and ended up being buried in various places in the British Isles. And you found out that West Ham Cemetery was one of the places where men from that hospital would end up being buried.
Oh, that's right, Georgie. I came across one particular case I picked out because it was actually closer to the time my grandfather came at the Royal Victoria Dock, and it was Abdul Rahman, and he died in September 1901, and he was buried in West Ham Cemetery. And I actually went in person to visit his grave, and I couldn't point to see which one it was. So I got the officer to show me the grave, and she told me he's buried in an unmarked public grave, unconsecrated, so he didn't see the funeral service. He was 55 years old, and his last abode or stay was the Seamen's Hospital, which was the one at Connaught Road, which was demolished. So again, there's something like 4 seafarers are buried in unmarked public graves at West Ham Cemetery, and it's just a bit of a tragedy to see them buried in graves that are not marked. And I actually asked the commission if I could leave that to stone for them, but essentially they gave permission, but I thought it would have done justice for the rest of them if I had a stone for him. and the rest were left out. So I did pursue that one.
You took a picture of this one monument, which is in the East India Docks. I mean, not the East India Docks, sorry, the Royal Victoria Docks. And the significance of this as the only statue was that we've been seeing lots of evidence of the South Asian seafarers from the Illustrated London News, etc., from those stories, but this statue doesn't really remember them at all.
That's right, Georgie. This statue, just opposite Excel at the Royal Victoria Dock, it shows dock workers, and it shows various dock workers shown in the statue, but the same job was also done by South Asian seafarers, but you wouldn't find them depicted in statues or monuments. So I felt that kind of like left out. How should I say?
This is your grandmother again. When she was younger, we're just coming back now because we're coming back to the medals, but also you told me that you also found that not only did she apply for the pension to which she was entitled, but she also applied for some benefits for her daughter who was disabled.
That's right, Georgie. This is actually a unique picture because I've never shared this previously in my previous conversation with Georgie. This actually, I think it was taken in some 1950s, and it's actually a picture we found from my late father's belongings. He never actually shared this with my mum or myself or so. But that's my grandmother, and yes, she did apply for pension for my aunt who died of epilepsy. But she was unsuccessful. She pursued the claim further and went to try the UNO, but she was still unsuccessful.
And your grandfather and your father? And your father? Yeah.
That's right. That's just my father and my grandfather. That was picture taken in 1965, and it was actually taken to show my grandmother back home in Pakistan how old your son is. and this again, my father, from his own words, he told me that he mentioned this in hospital in the last few nights before he passed away, that he said he was the first South Asian Class 1 HGV driver, and he was actually connected to a nurse in the hospital. And that's his heavy vehicle driver's license, which is actually a small little booklet. And I actually found that from his belongings after he passed away, and it was actually issued in 1979.
So coming back to the medals, you advertised widely to try and get them back, and you've got a story to tell about one of them.
That's right. I'll try to keep this short if possible. It's a long story, but I always wondered what the medals were. I actually found out what the names of the medals were. I began searching through medal fairs, the medal dealers, auctioneers. I obtained catalogues, searched through catalogues. I searched online. I ran adverts at the Medal News magazine, inside the OMRS journal as well, the Royal British Legion magazine as well. I couldn't name the magazines, it's too many. Yes, and I came across, and I wrote something like addresses on 200 envelopes, and I was about to post them out, and I thought, God, this didn't cost a lot. I just sent all these envelopes out. It was something like £200 in postage costs and envelopes. And eventually I did one final search online. I'm not hoping that I'll have some luck, but you don't hope, that's no luck, please. So I ran one final search, and I came across a website called www.coinsale.co.uk. This was run by Jim Strawbridge, and he's actually a retired person who lives in Devon. And he's a medal dealer, and he actually had the medal. So I contacted him through Facebook, through his website, and he couldn't get contact, so I done through Facebook, tracked him down on Facebook, sent him numerous messages, he didn't reply back. They eventually replied back to me, and he told me, yes, I do have this medal. And he asked me, why do you query it? I said, because I think it's my grandfather's medal. And he was happy to return it to me, and he returned it to me in December. In 1918, but it was not 1918, it was 2018, and it was the best, you could say, Christmas or New Year's present you could have. And he returned me the medal in December 2018.
I hold the microphone for you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. It looks like it's high-spec beans, but it's not actually high-spec beans. I've actually It's actually a safe. I keep doing it. And that's the actual original medal of my grandfather that was actually lost. It was taken by Jim Strawbridge. And I actually kept the letter that he wrote to me, return the medal. I've kept the letter, I kept the envelope as well. He sent it back to my special delivery. And that's the original British War medal with my grandfather's name inscribed on the ring of the medal. And I had the actual medal, I had doubts, so I actually, this was a thing I was overthinking, so I actually took the medal to Marcus Budgeon, who's a medal specialist at Spinks of London. And he actually had a look at it and told me that there's nothing wrong with this. It is a genuine medal. So I said to him that how do you know it's genuine? He told me that on the edge you find that slight cut. And it was that when medal dealers cut a medal, it's usually when they're testing to make sure it's genuine. And that's the original medal.
That's amazing. I'll let you put it back. And while you're putting it back, I'll just go on to the next slide because there's still a story because we still need to advertise for the next medal, which hasn't been found yet.
Yes, that's right. The last medal was the Mercantile Marine War medal, which is still missing. I managed to track it down to E-Medals, an auctioneer based in Ontario, Canada, and it was actually sold on their website, but I think I pestered them so much that they delete the page now. but I spoke to someone on the phone there who actually told me that the medal was sold to a buyer in India, and he wouldn't give me the email address or the contact list of the buyer. I suppose you can't actually do that. But he told me that he'd emailed the buyer in India, but the buyer's not come back. And I tried to track the medal down in India, but because India's quite a remote place, it's not like United Kingdom where you have these lavish medal fairs and auctioneers and it's like known dealers and known auctioneers, but in India it's not similar. So it's been a kind of a journey to track it down, but I've not been able to get it back. But I do hope that one day it will come back to me.
I just want to go back to your grandmother because I want to put her at the centre of the story again, because something that we've had conversations about, which you told me about women being the keepsakers of history, and if it wasn't for her having, number one, applied for the pensions, although she never came to the UK, for keeping all of these documents in the box, then none of this history would have been uncovered. We wouldn't have known any of the stories that you told us. So it's wonderful that we've got another picture of her now to remember her when she was younger.
That's right, Georgie. I remember when I first mentioned the story to Professor Victoria Haskins, who's present here, and thank you for being here today. I mentioned to her the story, and at the end, I sort of told her that all history was translated to me via my mother, and I never met my grandmother, and my father actually never told me anything about her. He's quite a reserved person by nature, so he never really spoke about his past. But Victoria told me that women are the custodians of history, and I actually did all that because it was actually my mother who told me about my father, that she heard from my grandmother that my grandfather was in the army, but back then it was so difficult to understand the army because she said the reason why she said army because she used the word Leshkar, and Leshkar actually meant army. So I searched all these records in National Archives, army records, and I couldn't find any records, and I went home to my mother that I can't find no records for him, she can't have been in the army. And then my mother told me that I met your grandmother, and that's what she told me, that he was in the army. And when I actually looked at this, it was actually the word Leshkar, which actually meant army. It was also used, but it could mean army as in a soldier in the military sense. It could also mean an army as in non-military sense. Like for seafarers, it was often referred to as Leshkar, meaning a camp or an army. Of an army of men, like if you have an army of men working the road, you might say an army of men who work to restore the footpath and so forth. So that's right, Georgie, about my grandmother. If it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have all I have today. And I remember when I first spoke in various events, I didn't actually have an image of my grandfather, my grandmother on the screen, and it was actually George that actually mentioned, I think we should put her on the screen. So we put her image there on the presentation.
So thank you, Asif, for sharing all of your research and your stories and the research you've been carrying out for several years now. It's really appreciated.
Thank you as well, Georgie, for your help and support. I'd like to thank the Runnymede Trust Clive James, I know he's not here today, he couldn't hear, and Siobhan as well. Is it Siobhan? Siobhan. Sorry about that. And there's so many people to thank for the Victoria as well. Dr. Nelly Bassett, who's travelled from Portsmouth. There's so many places to thank here, Dr. And archivists for University of East London, Peter Stone, David King. I could go thank you forever. But thanks a lot, thank you.
I think we all really want to thank you, Asif, actually. That was a beautiful story, and I'm so glad that you persisted in kind of pursuing all of those email conversations, eBay requests, and all the things that you did. But also, the beauty of this is the relationship between you and Georgie as well, actually, Georgie. I think that, Georgie, you've undersold what your contribution has been here, and I think that academic kind of life can often feel theoretical and abstract and removed from kind of real life experiences, but you have taken the time and the care to really kind of bring your research to life by investing in this story and in Asif's work as well. And I think the beauty of all of this is that relationship between the personal family history that you have struggled to bring to life and to bring to our attention, and Georgie, the way that it corresponds with your work as well. And actually, I don't know why you keep it in a baked bean tin, but I feel really emotional when you pull out your medal. I think it's a really lovely thing, and I hope that I can get a proper look at it at the end. I guess I wanted to say a couple of things though, just based on what you were talking about. Like I said, a lot of this is about the past and the archival work that you have done and the colonial history that kind of is very much also alive and present now. But I think there are so many of the things that you mentioned in terms of the inferior work contracts, right? So you talked about the work contracts that lots of these seafarers had on these ships, and you described the conditions that they worked in. We know that, for example, the bunks that they had, they were smaller. They were smaller for the South Asian seafarers. We know the food rations, as you mentioned, they were less than the other sailors. But then you also described the fact that they weren't allowed to settle here, so they were allowed to do the work, and often the harder work that you described in the kind of the furnaces, the bowels of the ship, kind of doing that really hard, hot work, which apparently they were biologically suited to because they could withstand heat. So you mentioned the contracts, you mentioned the bordering arrangements, which even though these sailors were allowed to work on these British ships, they weren't allowed to actually settle here. And part the reason for those desertion certificates is precisely because of that, right? And again, coming back to how that resonates with so much of what we know today. So we are coming up to the anniversary, the 75th anniversary of the Windrush coming into Tilbury Docks. And we know what happened to lots of the people who arrived on that ship, even though they were citizens who were entitled to settle and stay here. So there's lots of stuff that we need to kind of both remember, but it's an issue about why we have to remember them through personal struggles and individuals chasing this history, and why this isn't part of the way that we understand and see British history more generally. And I think that's what the Runnymede Trust, in terms of a lot of the work that we do, we see the importance of education, the importance of curriculum change, and about investing in some of that curriculum change in order to make sure that the kind of things that are raised here, they're the reasons why the narratives of exclusion, the narratives of kind of understanding Britain as a white indigenous country, and that the wealth and resources of Britain are solely derived from and the work and therefore should only benefit the white community. None of that really sits true to these kind of histories that we know are there if people are willing to kind of to engage with them. I did have a couple of questions I wanted to ask you both. I'm going to ask very quick reflections on them because I would like to open the floor so that people can ask questions too. But Asif in particular, I know that I did my own personal family history as part of the work that I did. But how did doing this work change you? What did it kind of mean for you in terms of your own personal sense of identity and yourself?
Good question. I think it's changed me a lot. It's given me an understanding of what the merchant navy was or mercantile was, and what sort of roles South Asian seafarers played in mercantile and the hardships they went through, especially an ancestor I never met, because I never physically met my grandfather. I never physically met my grandmother. And my grandfather died in 1965, long before I was born. So it just gives me insight into what sort of work he'd done, and it's given me a great sense of, you could say, belonging or Britishness, because I feel that they've contributed to Great Britain through their services. Whether, as my grandmother said in one of her pension letters, she mentioned that my husband served Britain in war and peace. So I think I see my grandfather having served Britain at times of war and in peace, keeping Britain going ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of, you've obviously had this conversation in various different forums. I think you said this is the first time you've been able to come to Parliament to share your story, and I think we're all very lucky for that. But what impact do you think sharing this story in those different forums and different spaces has had on those audiences?
I think it's had actually a huge positive impact, because I've come across numerous young people born here in the UK of a South Asian background who've now began investigating their histories, trying to find their ancestors, and they're asking for tips and clues. And I always tell them that find out what his name was from your parents, or what's your grandparents' names, and look in records, try and find out if they're anglicised names, and the year of birth will always be accurate to what you think. If you think that, for example, if I think my grandpa was born in 18, for example, my grandmother said in there, she said he was born in 1898. So try and look at a few years above and below. For example, on the crew list, my grandfather said 1895, but I know he was born around then. And then again, we hear a lot of discrepancies in information. So it's meant a lot to me, because I find that it's inspired of people to search for their ancestors, and I want to engage other people into it. I know Georgie's also had she mentioned something about, do you remember something? Is it better? She mentioned to me something about someone who'd been waving a print screen from a talk. I gave him to you, been waving it around and mentioning about South Asian seafarers and so forth.
And Georgie, when I introduced you, I did talk about some of the work that you've done, which is about kind of bordering and invisible empire. I wonder what you mean by that term, everyday bordering, and how you think it relates to what we talk about now in terms of the hostile environment policies.
Yeah, so I didn't talk about that very directly, but some time ago, in about 2014, I was working on a research project which was looking at the changing borders in Europe. And what we were finding out, and what is very much better known now, is that it's not just about the linear and territorial borders, but it's about the process of bordering. So whilst these linear borders that divide, France and Germany might not be really changing, what is changing is the way that we are carrying out border guarding roles on each other. And this became most obvious. It's been going on for a long time, which is something that I've tried to bring into the work around seafarers, which I'll just kind of expand on in a second. But particularly in 2014 and 2016 Immigration Acts and anything that's happened since then, with the introduction of what became known as the hostile environment policies, whereby, for example, landlords are obliged on penalty, they can be penalised if they don't do it. They're obliged to check the immigration status of any adult that they let their property to. Employers have been obliged to do that for a long time, but that was only really enforced sort of around 2006. Banks having to do the same things. You probably noticed so many more identity checks happening. So this idea of everyday bordering is that the border has moved into our everyday life. It's not just something that we cross at Heathrow or at Dover, Calais. And the impact that that's having on our lives, it's not just affecting people who are minoritized, who are racialized, who are seen as minorities, who are the targets of the borders, but everybody else who's obliged, without training, without payment, to carry out those bordering duties. So, I'm not a landlord, but if I was a landlord, I would want to be able to rent my property to who I wanted to, and it might be a vulnerable woman who was leaving domestic violence, who maybe didn't have the right to remain. But so I would resent very much the fact that I would then have to be checking their immigration status, for example. So, it's something that's impacting on everybody's life, and it's changing the whole kind of like relationships that we have with each other. And as I said, it's not something new. It's something that has become much more obvious to more people since the 2014 Immigration Act. But going back and talking about these stories and seeing how South Asian seafarers were boarded in this way. So, for example, the jumping ship, which we talk about, so-and-so jumped ship, or they deserted a ship, but that was crossing a border. That was leaving the contracts which they were kind of trapped in, where they were paid less, etc., and treated worse. Leaving that to go on shore and hopefully to be able to be re-engaged on a different ship on a British contract, which was possible, and happened. Many people managed to do that. So they had to try and escape the ship, and there's many stories. For example, Caroline Adams's oral histories of mainly Bengali seafarers records how people managed to kind of escape the ship when they were being treated particularly badly. But even when they left the ship, they would, there would be boarding house keepers or militias or other members of the public who would be carrying out this everyday boarding, trying to get them, they could be arrested, or the shipping companies would be obliged to kind of go and try and find them at different points. So this kind of bordering was carrying on. In fact, as I was saying earlier, that then working class Indian men they would embody the border. Like wherever they went, they could be questioned about, who are you, why are you here, aren't you meant to be on this ship? So this everyday bordering is something which has been going on for many years, but it's become particularly obvious in the way that we live now.
Thank you. Yeah, and coming back to the Windrush generation and this Windrush scandal in particular, it's precisely that operated against lots of these people who were citizens and perfectly entitled to work, to live, to access healthcare, but who found themselves victim to those boarding arrangements where you had people denied access to all of those, and indeed ending up dying as a result of some of those decisions that were being made through those boarding arrangements. So again, like the resonance between then and now are all too painful. And I guess what I would like to say before I kind of open up the floor is that a lot of what you described, I know Asif, you're from a Pakistani background, but a lot of what Georgie, you've just described there as well, the kind of the Bengali community in East London. So I was born in Tower Hamlets, but I grew up in Hackney. A lot of that community can trace their roots back to this kind of seafaring history. And again, like I said, I was born in this country, but I had no idea about some of this rich history, which is directly located in the place that I've lived and grown up. And it's only as an adult that I've come to recognise how significant some of these contributions are, both to the national story of Britain, but also to those local histories, and which really do kind of remain really much off the radar. I think there are kind of efforts, and I think we are seeing improvements there. But thank you so much, both of you, for your contributions, and I would like to open the floor to questions. I don't know if we need the mic, and to take the mic out to people.
No, it's all good.
No, it's all apparently all good. So I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself and then ask a question. So I'm going to go to here back.
Just speak really loudly.
I'll try. I'm Afzal Khan, Member of Parliament for Manchester Gorton and Shadow Justice Minister. I just want to start by thanking the running mate actually for hosting such an incredible event, such an informative event too. And Asif, amazing story that you shared about your grandfather. And I thought it was well done for actually finding the madam. That was something actually. My own grandfather served like this. My father served in the British Indian Army. And one thing which strikes me always is this very little known actually, the huge contribution that happened in the Indian subcontinent from all communities and then of course the Muslim wider world, and then of course Africa and West Indies and all that. What is it that we need to do actually to make sure that there is a more balanced and a better understanding of this wider contribution in where we are now? And of course that will help with the whole identity and those of the young people from backgrounds, their religious background they're coming from, to understand the contribution their forefathers also made. So what is it that we need to do more?
Yeah, history in schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken, haven't we, at colleges and schools, but I mean, it needs to go much deeper.
That's right. I actually think it does actually go to schools. I know we spoke at New College twice, or we spoke once online as well at New College. I've also had recently a request from Clash School. So it's quite a few schools, and I think we need to go down to grassroots schools to tell these stories there and to inspire young people to the future, of course, to look forward and try to trace their ancestor stories and find their history out.
I know that Runnymede has got a missing histories project, or an ongoing one. I know we contribute a bit to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we'd agree with the fact that obviously it's where schools are where kind of we get taught our initial ideas about history. I guess coming back to your question, it shouldn't just be about individual schools, individual teachers. We need people like you, Asal, and people in this place to be supporting those changes, so that actually it's a compulsory education that all students, regardless of whether they live in East London or Plashet or Newham or somewhere else indeed, that there is the compulsory element to how we think about our British history, which includes that. And I think that there are individual efforts across schools that are made, but we need that to be something that is compulsory and not something that is optional for schools and teachers. There are several questions. I'm thinking of time, so maybe we're going to take 2 or 3 questions at one go, and then we'll get the panelists to answer. So again, if you'd like to introduce yourself, yes, and then...
Yeah, my name is Mohammed Afeullah. I'm involved in sort of historical kind of work, right? Heritage work. Now, I just want to share something with you, Asif, right? There is a Netflix film about someone like you. Yeah. Right? It's called Pulang. Pulang in Malay language means return home, right? Returning home. It's about a Malay seaman. The story begins before the Second World War starts. It's a love story, and then the story becomes very sad. He joins the merchant navy. The grandson actually searches for him because he goes missing. He doesn't come back home, although he promised his wife they would come back. And this poor lady became very old, and she's just waiting for him, but he never comes. So the grandson traces the grandfather to Liverpool. But by the time he got to Liverpool, he had actually died. So some archivist in Liverpool actually helped him go visit the grave. So it's a really story like yours, made into a Netflix film. But one thing really interesting, I don't know how well they got enacted or depicted, whatever. There's so much beautiful scenes, Hong Kong in the 1950s, where he visits many different places, snow, what happens at sea, storms, and really interesting. That will give you some idea, if they've done a good job about what life was like.
Thank you. We're going to hi.
My name is Dean Arman. I'm from the Custom House Bookshop. I also live in Newham. In answer to the MP's statement, Newham Council have a South Asian History Month every month. Sadly, it is woefully undermarketed. And no one even knows it exists. Lots of councillors didn't even know last year. So there are things. There are things like the South Asian History Month, and I'll be speaking to Dr. Georgie and Asif to see if we can get more promotion for this South Asian History Month. When stories like this, especially in Newham, we need them.
Thank you, Dean. I'm going to go to, Mandy's going to sort out Mike.
So I love the name Chains to Lose. You give me an inspiration, Locked In to Win. But the question is regarding the subcontinent. So you did go on about medals, and one being silver, one being, I can't remember, but it wasn't silver. And do you feel that was aligned to sub meaning below, underneath, and the racial element coming through with the coin depiction, medal? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Should we go to the next question along, and then we'll answer that? Thank you.
It's more than an announcement I will make. So my name is Unearthing, and I'm the London Assembly member for City and East London, which covers the Royal Docks. So I'm based at City Hall, which Georgie mentioned, and I've known Asif for many years and fantastic work. Was Stephen Tibbs was here earlier. We've supported Asif, and we're really so proud that we put all this on record and what you said about recording history. So one of the things that with some local councillors that we started a campaign to erect a monument to the Lashkars. So like the statue outside Excel of the three doctors, I actually know two of the three. One of them, Johnny Ringwood, still lives in Romford, and that's an important part of history as well. There is an unrecorded part of the Lashkars. It's mentioned on the wall alongside Custom House Road, the Siemens hotel is. And that's only on the side. No one reads it, no one actually understands it. I think a fitting way to record our history and to keep the message alive in the years to come is to erect some sort of monument. So I'm sure Young Council will support you. From the GLA, we'll be approaching Sadiq Khan as well. Certainly as a London Assembly member, I'll apply my support to that campaign.
Thank you, Ramesh, for that. And it's interesting because it probably links to the question that came from the gentleman in the middle. I said, do you want to speak to that about the difference in quality between the medals? I think that's what you're referring to, right? What your thoughts and reflections are on that, and then I will take the questions on this side.
That's a really good question. I was looking at correspondence at the British Library and Archives, and there was correspondence about the medals being manufactured in steel for the Indians and silver for the British seafarer. So I kind of got the impression that perhaps there was some form of hierarchy, and I was having a discussion with John Sibley from Birkbeck University, and it seemed like there's some form of hierarchy. If it was an Indian seafarer who received a medal made out of steel, and if it was a British seafarer who had been issued a medal made out of silver, perhaps there is a racialization element. I wouldn't like to go too deep into that.
I think you're being too generous, I said.
So I also looked at the fact that some seafarers, South Asian seafarers, applied for their medals here in the UK straight after the war when they were resident here. So if they were resident for 2 years, up to 2 years after the war in the UK, and they applied for their medals here, they would have received a medal made out of silver and not steel. So that's something interesting as well.
Sorry, what was his name? I'm studying in Birkbeck, that by the way. So
John Sibley.
John Sibley. Sybil.
Yeah, S-I-B-L-O-N.
All right, thank you for that. I'm going to take some more questions from this side here. I've got the lady just here in the white top.
Hi, Asif. This was so good, and glad that I could meet you in person. So my name is Manika Datta. And what I just wanted to ask is that while you were researching, did you actually get to know something about the everyday life of these Laskar, these, I don't like this term, the South Asian, like the seafaring community, what their lives were, on board and as well as in the port cities?
Okay, thank you. And then we've got a question just there.
Clara Sami, I'm president of Commerce UK. I'm here to, listening to all of these stories, this collectively called as the intangible culture of diaspora community. Much of our heritage is in the community, not in museums or archives, and the people hold those stories and memories, and they need to be recorded. The UNESCO Convention, 2003 Convention, has asked for these memories and stories and customs and traditions to be recorded, to be passed on to the next generation. We haven't ratified. We are the handful of countries who, out of the 180 states parties who are members of the UNESCO conventions, we haven't ratified it. We've been asking the government to ratify it. We are still in negotiation. We don't know what is stopping it. And if the MP is still here, he may wish to persuade the powers to be to ratify that convention. That will give power to communities to record, document, archive it, and pass it on to the next generation. Additional information is about the recent funding